That's why on the night before he died, you remember that speech he gave? He talked about something that sounded inevitable. You remember what he said, don't you? Like anybody, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. And I might not get there with you. But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. If he would finish that song, it sounds inevitable. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before the judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Our God is marching on. That dream didn't belong to King. He was the steward of the dream, but the source of the dream was the heart and mind of God. Yeah, Joseph had a dream. But it wasn't Joseph's dream. It was a dream that came from God. It was a high and holy dream. It was a noble dream, like the king's dream. But I want you to notice, my brothers and sisters, that even though Joseph had a dream, that dream got him in trouble. It was a noble dream. It was a God-inspired dream. But it had gravitational pull on hatred. People hated him because of his dream. And we already know that's true about Dr. King, because he got killed because of his dream. But if you would look even closer at the text, the story of Joseph, you'll discover that when you talk about Joseph's dream, if you see the hermeneutical implications of it, you'll discover that what caused the hatred towards him was not simply that he had a dream, not even that he articulated the dream, but what really caused them to hate him was the potential of the realization of the dream. That's why when they saw him coming, they say, "Here come the dreamer. Let's kill him, and then we will see what will come of his dream." The reason why they hated him, because they were intimidated by the realization of the dream. And you do understand that Dr. King was not hated, vilified, and then assassinated just because he had a dream. People are not intimidated by the fact that you have a dream. King was not hated and vilified and eventually killed even for simply articulating a dream. But what got him killed is he had the audacious audacity to think that he could try to concretize what he had conceptualized. In other words, he tried to put into action what he had articulated in his dream. He didn't just talk it, he tried to walk it. And see, people don't get nervous until you get serious about the dream. And he got serious about the dream. And see, one of the reasons why I think one of the favorite images that this nation has of King is him giving his "I have a dream" speech, is because that's a safe image. There's nothing intimidating about a black Baptist preacher on the steps of Lincoln Memorial talking eloquently about a dream. But there are other images and scenes and scenarios and issues and things in the life of King that were much more threatening than him simply articulating a dream. No, you don't get killed because you have a dream. You don't get killed because you can tell your dream. You get killed when you try to be the incarnation of your dream. And they hated him, didn't they? Yeah, right, racist folk hated him. They didn't like his protests. They didn't like his politics. They didn't like King at all. In fact, they tried to accuse him of being unpatriotic. He said, anybody who talks like the nation the way you do can't love this nation. You either love it or leave it. And he retorted, it's because I love it that I can't leave it the way it is. And they talked about his protests. Why are you stirring up trouble? Why are you outside agitating? Why are you demonstrating in protest, and he responded that one of the great glories of American democracy is the right to protest for right. They hated him. He was hounded by day, harassed by night. His life was threatened. His family was threatened. And he was threatened by people who were not the lovers of justice. They were threatened because they knew that what King dreamed meant that there had to be a change in the unholy arrangement. An arrangement that necessitated that those who were in power and had privilege had to keep in power and privilege by keeping power and privilege from others. And that structure was unholy. So King came along talking about let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. He came talking about reordering the way things are and sharing power. But they were intimidated, and the word was hard because King was right when he said the powerful never voluntarily give up power. It must be demanded by the powerless. They didn't like King. They hated him. Wait, look at the text a little closer. You see something that makes the point more poignant, because the text doesn't simply say that Joseph was hated by people. It's more specific than that. The text says that Joseph was hated by his brothers. And the irony of it all, the tragic irony is, as the very people who tried to stop the dream were the people that God intended to benefit from the dream. Come on, take a peek ahead in the story. You remember that when God brought him to the pinnacle of power and prestige, he was placed there and positioned there so that when the famine came, he would be the one to help his brothers in the time of need. And yet they tried to stop something God intended to bless them. Come here a little bit closer. Let me show you something. King was not only just hated by white races, but King was also hated by his brothers. I know it's hard to talk about, but it's true. And the interesting thing is that it's hard to find anybody these days who was alive when King was around that didn't like King. Everybody loves King now. But back then, the truth of the matter is that white racists were not the only one who did not like King. There were some preaching brothers who didn't like King as well. And there were people who were part of the population of the oppressed who didn't like King as well. There are a multiplicity of reasons, I suspect, why people didn't like the way King was acting. Some people just like the status quo, don't rock the boat because it feels safe and secure. Other people that disagree with him philosophically, they said you ought to just stay in spiritual matters and stay out of politics, stay out of economics, stay out of social issues, not understanding that if you deal with spiritual issues, that is the vertical relationship, that you inevitably have to talk about relationships with one another socially, economically, and politically, because you cannot talk about your love for God and not at the same time talk about your love for your brothers and your sisters. Jesus said the two greatest commandments are love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. These two hang all of the law, which means that they are inextricably bound together. So you can't talk about loving a God whom you haven't seen, and you can't stand the person sitting next to you. You're lying. The truth is not in there. Some people disagreed philosophically with King, but then others disagreed with King because whenever there's an unholy arrangement with people who have power and keep it by taking power from others, they maintain their positions of power in part by parceling out pieces of power to particular people who are among the oppressed. And they use the pieces of power that they parcel to pacify those who are part of the oppressed. And those who are part of the oppressed become the gatekeepers for the oppressors. And so they didn't like what King had to say. No, it wasn't just white racists who hated King. King was also hated by his brothers. But you'll notice in the story of Joseph that regardless of the hatred that they had for Joseph, it didn't stop him from pursuing God's dream for his life. And what was true about him is also true about King. He was hated by white racists and oppressors. He was hated by some who were part of the oppressed, but it didn't stop him from working towards the dream that God had put in his heart. In fact, he was so committed to the dream that he did not allow how he was treated by anybody to make them mistreat him. King said they could hate him all he wants, but you don't deal with hate by adding more hate to hate. And that just makes the atmosphere more hateful. You don't deal with darkness by adding darkness to darkness. It just makes the darkness darker. The only way to deal with darkness is you got to cut the lights on. The only way to deal with hatred is you got to love somebody. And so King didn't allow the people who were in power or the people who were the powerless to discourage him from doing what God wanted him to do. And so he kept on speaking truth to power. Not so that he could change the arrangement and replace one form of oppression with another. But King said over and over again that his goal was to try to win those who hated him to him. In other words, he was saying, we're suffering now, but unearned suffering is redemptive. If you love anyway, you run the risk of making your enemy your friend. And so he was willing to suffer for the sake of transforming the hearts of those who were trying to oppress him. And yet he was wise enough to know that while he was trying to appeal to the hearts of men, in the meantime, in between time, while their hearts are trying to change, you not only need to appeal to love, but you need to write some legislation as well. Now I know when you talk like that to some folk, they say, well, why are you talking about legislation? You can't legislate love. Can I tell you what King said? He said, legislation can't make you love me, but it can keep you from lynching me, and I think that's important too. So there's a place, a time, and a place for legislation. He appealed to their hearts, and in the meantime wrote legislation so that the unholy arrangement can be rearranged. He appealed to those who are the oppressed. He spoke truth courageously to power. But watch, King not only spoke truth to power, but what we don't talk a lot about is that King also lovingly spoke truth to the powerless. One has to do with dealing with institutional racisms and personal prejudice, and the other has to do with assuming the responsibilities, or those of the oppressed taking responsibility for their lives. Oftentimes when we have the debate, people frame the debate as if it's an either-or prospect. Either you deal with systematic prejudice and racism, or you teach people who are oppressed how to be more responsible with their lives. But it is not either-or. It is not the thesis of one or the antithesis of the other. It's the synthesis of both. It's a both and debate and conversation. And so King not only talked to the oppressor, but he also spoke truth lovingly to the oppressed. He was letting them know that you don't have to put up with what you're putting up with. You don't have to be defined by what's happening to you. You don't have to be what people are calling you. He says you must not know who you are. You made in the image of God. You have etched within you the eternal image of a triune God. You are somebody. You might be oppressed, but you're somebody. You might be poor, but you're somebody. They might be calling you out of your name, but you are somebody. And since you are somebody simply because you are a child of God, straighten your back. He said, because when you straighten your back, folk can't hide you when you straighten your back. He tried to empower them and inspire them. And then King also told them that we've got to make sure, not only that we've worked to make sure that doors of opportunity are open. He said, but you got to make sure simultaneously that you're preparing yourself for open doors. What good is it to have doors open if you're not prepared to walk through it when it doesn't? And so he was an advocate, not only a tender heart, but a tough mouth.